2025. Thank you, Zane. Um, so we were fortunate to have Miss Yvonne, who's done some fantastic work on it and presentations in various locations. God, I don't know. She gave me a list a while ago, but at a variety of places. And we were fortunate that she was willing to do it for us. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn over to Miss Yvonne and let her introduce introduce herself briefly. Most of us know her. She's got a partner in crime, Mr. Levin, and she'll be able to introduce him, and then they can take it away, and then on we go.
Well, Jeff is going to bring up the slide deck, and I'll introduce him during the presentation.
Okay.
All righty.
Yvonne, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Can you see my screen?
Uh-huh. We're going to put it in, there we go. Great. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank DDI for inviting Freedom Writers Collaborative to this opportunity to share our deep dive into Project 2025, which is a chilling, nearly 1,000-page conservative leadership mandate with a great deal of specificity on how it will be implemented. On the first day of the Washington State Convention, I had the opportunity to speak with this really adorable young couple at the People of Color Caucus. And at the end, we were standing around just chatting before the next event. And I asked that young lady if she had heard of Project 2025. She had not, so I gave her the Cliff Notes version, kind of a summary of the horrible democratic destroying things in the plan. And she looked at me and said, "That sounds like a conspiracy theory to me." Well, as Taraja P. Henderson said at the BET Awards, like maybe a week or two later, I told her, look it up. It's real, and it's a clear and present threat to our democracy. To me, honestly, this Project 2025 feels like a compilation of The Handmaid's Tale, George Orwell's 1984, and Fahrenheit 451, all coming together in this horrible and dangerous plan to end democracy as we know it. They weren't ready in 2017 because they really didn't think Trump was going to win. But if Trump gets elected this November, they will be ready to press the button on this plan the moment he is declared the winner. They will not wait for the inauguration. But before I dive in, I want to share how I became aware of and alarmed by Trump's Project 2025. Jeff Levine and I belong to a multi-state indivisible chapter called Freedom Writers Collaborative. We build ready-made, research-validated social media toolkits to educate voters and raise awareness about issues that affect their lives, especially to reach digital natives who's age 18 to 24, who told Pew Research that they get 100% of their news from social media online. So in the summer of 2023, we Freedom Writers began discussing Project 2025 and decided to build a social media toolkit on the subject. Our incredibly gifted graphic artist created the memes that you're going to see throughout this presentation, and then a few more at the end. So my role on the team is writing text to accompany the memes that go in our toolkits. So I downloaded the Heritage Foundation's 920-page document to get some talking points to attach to the graphics to give context to each one of the individual memes so that the text would be relevant to the picture. Well, just scanning the document made me physically ill. So a few weeks later, at a rather, I raised the alarm at a MoveOn.org meeting with like hair on fire concern that at the time there didn't seem to be any urgency whatsoever or even awareness of this plan. Not even the press was covering it. So when MoveOn asked me to make a presentation to the group, I went back to that Project 2025 PDF and read it more closely, pulled out some of the more distressing details from those pages, which I'm going to share with you. But before I do, my Freedom Rider co-leader, Jeff, is going to play Freedom Riders Project 2025 video that we released with the subject toolkit. And I want to warn you, it is disturbing.
I have to click on
Sound
something.
button.
All right, sure.
Oh, yeah. You have to stop sharing.
President Trump, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you.
I want to dive right into this, a lot to get to.
The media have failed to expose Donald Trump in a framework that communicates the danger of a
Picture's not
2024
showing, Jeff.
Republican presidency.
The video isn't showing.
They continue to treat him as a regular candidate and not the leader of a dangerous anti-democracy party. His Republican Party doesn't even have a platform and has become the first party in modern history without one.
Jeff, it's
The
not
obvious reason
showing.
is that without a stated platform, their unpopular ideas cannot be challenged in open debate. But in their hubris, they made a mistake.
It's not showing, Jeff.
In 2025, it's a call for you to come work here, Washington, D.C.
I'm getting an error message. Are you not seeing my video?
No, not seeing it at all.
Okay, so thank you. Let me start over.
Yeah, we saw the slide, but not the video.
Sorry. Let's do this again.
But Jeff, we could hear it, but just couldn't see it.
Didn't see
Okay,
it.
let me just try it again.
Now we can see it.
President Trump, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you.
I want to dive right into this, a lot to get to.
Good.
The media have failed to expose Donald Trump in a framework that communicates the danger of a 2024 Republican presidency. They continue to treat him as a regular candidate and not the leader of a dangerous anti-democracy party. His Republican Party doesn't even have a platform and has become the first party in modern history without one. The obvious reason is that without a stated platform, their unpopular ideas cannot be challenged in open debate. But in their hubris, they made a mistake.
Project 2025. It's a call for you to come work here, Washington, D.C.
A cluster of right-wing extremist groups got together and put all of their dangerous ideas in a 920-page document called Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025. This is the playbook for what they want to happen to America, should Trump or any other Republican president take office after winning the next election. Project 2025 is the doom of our multicultural democracy and the end of the rule of law. It dispenses with constitutional checks and balances and concentrates almost unlimited power in the executive branch. The diabolical plan that is Project 2025 was created by Christian nationalists and funded by the fossil fuel industry. Project 2025 has action plans to take away the rights of minorities, quote-unquote leftists, LGBTQIA plus Americans, and anyone who opposes extremist right-wing ideology. Project 2025 is the Mein Kampf of our age, the fully formed master plan for the takeover of the federal government and its weaponization against its own citizens. Now that we know their plan, we can alert voters to this danger. Help us spread the word by going to www.freedomwriterscollaborative.org and share our Project 2025 social media kit.
Thanks, Jeff. So if you bring up the next slide, I'll just talk about what I'm going to do. So the next 45 minutes or so, I'm about to take you through some details that probably are going to cause some of you to lose sleep tonight, knowing that if Kamala Harris does not win in November and Donald Trump does, we will begin living in a United States of America that we will not even recognize. And thanks to Trump's Project 2025, if he wins, this is probably the last vote that we, the people, will ever cast. He will become a dictator on day one as he continues to promise that he will. And again, they will not wait for the inauguration. They will start immediately. Next slide, please.
Just 1 second.
Oh, okay. You still getting an error?
Yeah, I'm still, I think I fixed it.
Oh, great.
All right.
You just go to slide
Can
4.
you see my slide now?
Yes, I can.
All right. Okay.
Go to slide number 4. Perfect.
Is that it?
So that's it. So this project 2025 was created under the leadership of the right-wing think tank called the Heritage Foundation, aided with about 110 right-wing organizations who have built corporate-level execution plans, all intended to pack the next GOP MAGA administration with extreme loyalists to Donald Trump. We highlighted a few people whose names you might recognize. Mark Meadows, for example, he was Trump's former chief of staff, and he is CEO of the Conservative Partnership Institute with their $36 million annual budget from private donors. His group operates a full-service nerve center for right-wing activity and a breeding ground for the next generation of Trump loyalists. Or take Stephen.
This is Democratic Party, the DEI people. I'm a member of.
Ali,
Yes, sorry.
Can someone put everyone on mute?
I think I got mute happy. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Okay, I've
Yvonne.
unmuted myself. Okay. I was just about to talk about Stephen Miller. He's the architect of Trump's family separation at the border policy. And he is CEO of America First Legal, which is a group that's going after diversity, equity, and inclusion in public and private institutions under the grievance of reverse racism. And there's Charlie Kirk. He's CEO of Turning Point USA. They advocate for conservative politics in high schools, colleges, and university campuses. And some of the college presidents who have been called to Congress for one thing or another have been fired from their institutions because of pressure from this guy who is a donor to many of these colleges and universities, and they're afraid of that their funding will be cut off. Next slide, please. There are 4 pillars to this devious plan. Pillar number 1 is a policy agenda mandate for leadership, otherwise known as the Conservative Promise. Think of it as their policy Bible, and those are their words, not mine. The entire book's sole purpose is to reshape federal policy, to shift from societal and constitutional norms that we've lived under for what, 248 years, I think, that could result in termination of more of our freedoms. We must alert citizens to the dangers of this plan and make them vote in November. Pillar number 2 is the personnel database, where resumes from conservative scholars, academics, and policy experts are being compiled. You can think of this pillar as conservatives only LinkedIn database, where the authors of this policy set a goal of having at least 200,000 recruits already in the database as a way to have a readily available pool of ideologically aligned people to pull from when it comes to filling those positions. They plan to create these positions as they fire the civil servants who hold these jobs today. Again, those are their words, not mine. Pillar number 3 is an online educational training system built to indoctrinate potential U.S. government employees under the rules of the next conservative president. The people who submit their resumes and apply for these jobs are first required to make a loyalty pledge to the president, to obey dear leader's every command or face dismissal or possible imprisonment. He's done it before. Because Trump's fired, you have to remember when Trump fired FBI Director Comey just a few days after they met, because Trump asked him for his unquestioned loyalty to him, and Comey told Trump that his pledge was to the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law, and not to a person. He was summarily fired. Pillar number 4 outlines the transition plan in a 180-day playbook that's driven by the policy agenda itself as kind of a roadmap. The Heritage Foundation's preamble has been around for decades, all the way back to Clinton era and Newt Gingrich's contract with America. A prelude to this handbook states, quote, "Our goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state," end quote. Together, folks, these pillars make up Project 2021. And why should we care? And what can we do about it? Well, first, we need to know some details. So I did a chapter by chapter deep dive into the details of this diabolical plan, and I will take you through some of those details. But as we get toward November, people need to understand that this is actually happening. Next slide, please. Government takeover. Okay, so chapter 3 in this book is entitled Central Personnel Agencies, Managing the Bureaucracy. This is part of the mandate that will undermine the checks and balances in our government and give Trump and future presidents dictatorial control over federal agencies. One of the key elements of this project, administrative goal, is to reinstate the executive order known as Schedule F. This would reclassify thousands of federal employees, making them at-will workers, and give the administration the ability to fire employees who don't agree with or follow the extreme policies suggested by Trump and his minions. Think about this. They want to replace thousands of civil servants with scientific or other expertise with people chosen for their political loyalty and willingness to follow orders without question. Project 2025 would gut requirements for overtime pay and make it easier for companies to classify workers as independent contractors who have fewer legal protections than employees. It would weaken workers' ability to organize and form unions. Try to imagine how many people of color hold these federal jobs all over the United States and how devastating this would be to many minority families and communities. Project 2025 has created a training academy for potential employees of the next Trump administration, which, quote, provides aspiring appointees with the insight, background knowledge, and expertise in governance to immediately begin rolling back policies and advancing conservative ideas in the federal government. Again, their words, not mine. The goal of the training, which currently consists of 4 online courses on subjects such as Conservative Governance 101 and the administrative state and the regulatory process, is intended to prepare and equip future political appointees now to be ready on day one of the Trump or next conservative administration. So keep in mind, if Trump doesn't win, they'll just simply put Project 2025 in a file cabinet until the next conservative wins that office. Project 2025 makes it clear that the Department of Justice will not be independent from the executive branch. All the power will be held in the executive branch. It also implies that the agency can use and take legal retribution against whomever the Trump decides to target and investigate. And I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Kevin Roberts. He's president of the Heritage Foundation, and therefore one of the main leaders of Project 2025. He has suggested that a second American Revolution will occur if a Republican president wins the White House in November. Specifically, he said, and I quote, "We are in the process of the second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be," end quote. Now that's what I call saying the quiet part, wow, way out loud. Project 2025's director, Paul Dance, who served as chief of staff at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management during Trump's administration, was fired a few days ago because Trump began to see the vulnerability of this plan to his campaign. But before Dance was released, he appeared on Steve Bannon's War Room and encouraged people to come put their resumes into the database. And I think they already have 200,000. Next slide, please. It hasn't moved. Ah, wonderful, thanks. References to religion are mentioned in this plan 115 times. And here's some of those highlights. Under Christian nationalist order, a healthy society is based solely on the biblical definition of a family: a mother, a father, and children. LGBTQ families will not be recognized as such. This plan would encourage private businesses to follow the Supreme Court ruling that affirmed discrimination against LGBTQ people, as in the case of the Colorado web designer whose name was used in a case brought before the Supreme Court in 2017, saying that he was harmed because a web designer refused to make a same-sex website for him. His name and phone number and email address were used in the court filing, but when contacted by the Associated Press, he said he knew nothing about the case and said, quote, "I was incredibly surprised given the fact that I've been happily married to a woman for the last 15 years. Then he added, and I'm a web designer. I could design my own website if I needed to." Those 110 organizations I shared earlier are behind these cases that are summarily being brought before a willing Federalist Society-owned Supreme Court that seems to have connections of its own to Project 2025. The plan intends to decree that Sunday, the Sabbath day, will be a mandatory day off work, even for private businesses. Hey, forget taking the family out for Sunday dinner. There won't be any places open. Pastors and Catholics for Trump, a real coalition, are mobilizing clergy to spread violent Christian nationalist lies from their pulpits. You should take a look at some of them sometimes. Trump claims that a president should have absolute immunity for anything he does, including being able to arrest, imprison, and even execute his perceived enemies. On its face, it's absurd, but the Supreme Court actually took the case, which they didn't have to because the U.S. Court of Appeals had said that's poppycock like 5 months earlier. And as I suspected, the Supreme Court waited to release their ruling on his absolute immunity for the last day of their term in June. Actually, I think it was July 1st. So when they ruled 6-3 to give Trump what he wanted, they quickly and quietly left for their summer break, having made Trump's delay until after the election wish come true. Cowards. Next slide, please. Reproductive rights, yes, indeed. Under reproductive rights, the word abortion is mentioned 199 times. These people actually want to establish what they intend to call the Department of Life. This is right out of Margaret Atwood's 1985 book, The Handmaid's Tale, which is a fictional dystopian view of women losing their rights as citizens and serving as vessels to procreate for rich white men. Another of the project's core objectives is to reduce the federal government's involvement in healthcare. This means the incoming president could take a battle axe to the agencies that run Medicare and Medicaid, as well as affiliated offices that research treatment for insidious diseases, and those that approve prescriptions and medical devices, and even personal products like cosmetics. This project would limit families' options by making the government policy to protect federal fertilized eggs from the moment of conception, threatening access to abortion and birth control in all states, and making it a crime for doctors to provide abortion medication. It would ban health clinics that receive federal Title X funding from distributing condoms. And with the next Republican administration, you should expect a national abortion ban. You should expect women and their doctors to be criminally prosecuted for providing reproductive services. And as it was done in Mississippi, they will criminalize and purposely criminalize the purposeful or accidental destruction of unfertilized frozen eggs, embryos in all states. And as disgusting as it sounds, they want to track women who leave restricted states to obtain reproductive health care. They want to monitor women's menstrual periods, then chase them down and bring them back to those states for prosecution if they seek reproductive health care in a state that accepts them. Doesn't that kind of ominously sound like slave catchers who were employed to track down and return escaped slaves to their enslavers? Yeah, it sounds that way to me too. And to add insult to injury, they want to eliminate no-fault divorce so that women who are in abusive marriages won't be able to get out of those marriages unless their abusive husband agrees. Trump's cuckoo vice president pick, J.D. Vance, echoed this exact sentiment in several interviews he did last week. Next slide, please. Under law enforcement, this plan would terminate any unlawful investigations, quote, in the newly elected president or his prior cabinet. If elected, Trump will pardon himself, and he promises to pardon the convicted criminals who attempted to prevent the peaceful transfer of power on January 6, 2021. And he even opens his rallies with the convicts singing the national anthem. It's shameful. For the rest of us, Project 2025 mandates that the Justice Department will assume control over law enforcement activities when local governance is deemed insufficient by federal standards. This includes intervening in how public protests are managed and policed. And with oversight moving away from local to federal, it becomes more challenging for citizens who seek redress or influence police policies that directly affect their communities. Think of George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery. Under that plan, those families would not have been able to sue for wrongful death. They promise military and or police crackdowns on lawful protests, along with jail time or even death for protesters without due process. Something Trump really wants to do and actually did do during the Black Lives Matter protests, which is to send the military into blue cities that he deems lawless or high crime, like New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, and so on. Naturally, they desperately want to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion, along with affirmative action programs across the government, military, and even private businesses. By the way, DEI is mentioned 39 times and affirmative action, equity, and inclusion 90 times. So it's clear that they are coming after people who look like many of us. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Trump's Project 2025 eliminates federal protections for citizens, including not protecting hate crimes against LGBTQ citizens. It calls for the Department of Justice to no longer defend the First Amendment rights of these citizens to be themselves, and even eliminates the term sexual orientation and gender identity from government records and policies. Excuse me. It halts all research against gender reassignment and defines transgender citizens as pornographers and groomers who should all be prosecuted, imprisoned, and removed from Christian society, and reverse policies allowing transgender people to serve in the military, and of course, reinstate the Clinton era don't ask, don't tell policies in the military. Next slide. Project 2025 proposes to undermine the federal government's ability to protect workers, consumers, communities, and even our environment from corporate wrongdoing. And they will end what they see as government interference in energy decisions and stop the so-called war on natural gas, making sure that private companies that threaten our climate are no longer federally regulated. Project 2025 suggests eliminating NOAA and the National Weather Service, replacing those vital organizations with private companies. Their blueprint appears to leave the National Hurricane Center intact, thank God, saying, quote, the data it collects should be presented neutrally without adjustment that might be intended to support any one side of the climate debate, end quote. Our activist Supreme Court has provided the avenue for this to happen by overturning the Chevron doctrine, by overturning this 1984 landmark decision in Chevron versus Natural Resource Defense Council. The Supreme Court has expanded the authority of conservative judges to rewrite the rules in favor of corporations and special interest groups. Folks, enjoy that clean air and clean water while you can. This decision marks another power grab by the MAGA Supreme Court majority, aiming at increasing corporate and special interest influence over our lives. Don't forget, SCOTUS also ruled that bribes are okay as long as the gratuity is offered after the favor has been granted. Think of government contract awards to, let's say, real estate developers, American oligarchs, frankly, who want to take possession of your family's property by eminent domain so that they can build another mixed high-rise. I can just see the letter of gratitude now. Dear public official, thank you for displacing all those people so I can make more money. Here is an envelope with a nice bundle of cash to thank you for getting that done. Hope we can do business together again soon. Think about it. Next slide, please. As you might imagine, immigrants won't do well in the authoritarian version of America. They won't, excuse me, they even want to revoke immigration benefits that have traditionally been granted to unaccompanied migrant children. And you won't be surprised that the word alien and alien children was used 37 times. These people really hate immigrants. And you won't believe their plans for Dreamers, which includes blocking financial aid for up to 2/3 of all American college students if their state permits certain immigrant groups, including Dreamers with legal access, to access in-state tuition. They will terminate the legal status of 500,000 Dreamers by eliminating staff time for reviewing and processing renewal applications. They will suspend updates to annual eligible countries list for H-2A and H-2B temporary worker visas, thereby excluding most populations from filling critical gaps in agriculture, construction, hospitality, forest sectors. Imagine how many professionals we might lose in the medical and scientific research sectors. The project will bar U.S. citizens from qualifying for federal housing subsidies if they live with anyone who is not a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. And they will force states to share driver's licenses and taxpayer identification information with federal authorities or risk losing critical federal funding. Florida, in fact, already requires hospitals to report any non-residents to Florida state government anytime someone can't prove their immigration status, but they come in for medical care. These undocumented people aren't stupid. On the day the Florida edict was signed into law by Governor DeSantis, many immigrants who worked in the agriculture and construction industry dropped their tools, left their food, their fruits and vegetables to rot on the ground, and moved themselves and their families to friendlier states. Next slide, please. While the document contains dozens of controversial proposals, arguably the biggest one is to shut down the Department of Education, an institution that was created in 1867, not long after the end of the Civil War. The theory, according to the blueprint, is to eliminate red tape so that families will be free to choose from a diverse set of school options and learning environments. This plan would wipe out the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights, a sub-agency that enforces civil rights laws and investigates schools accused of engaging in discrimination, which has handled more than 19,000 complaints over the last decade and roughly 1,000 cases in the 22-23 school year alone. By eliminating the Department of Education, this plan proposes to send our tax dollars to Christian schools while doubling down what teachers can reach to teach kids in public schools. And they want to allow groups like Moms for Liberty to determine what your kids and your grandkids can read or learn. And of course, curb the teaching of race and equality in schools. They want to eliminate, folks, Head Start programs and cut what they call wasteful school meal programs. They want to swap out Pell Grants for private loans and eliminate Biden's student loan forgiveness program permanently. We already see what they're doing to dismantle public education systems, banning books, threatening teachers, librarians, members of school boards, eliminating slavery from the history of the United States. Or when it is discussed, they want kids to believe that slaves somehow benefited by gaining useful skills. As we know from our history, that enslaved people brought many of those skills with them from their homelands and taught their masters. Next slide, please. So the plan for proposed slashing funding for the Department of Justice, dismantling the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Homeland Security, even the National Weather Service, to sharply reduce environmental and climate change regulations in favor of fossil fuel production. And as I mentioned earlier, under Trump's second term, would begin by purging non-partisan civil service workers like EPA scientists, IRS accountants, and other jobs, and facing the unqualified toadies of Trump's. During the first term, Trump gave the U.S. Department of Agriculture researchers an ultimatum: lose your job or move yourself and your family to, I think it was Kansas. Now, why did he do that? He did that because agricultural researchers published and funded objective analyses of issues such as climate change, the efficiency of food assistance programs, and tax cuts that mostly benefited the richest farmers. Trump did not receive this well, so those folks moved. Our most vulnerable government victim is the Justice Department, starting, it seems, with the FBI, which is mentioned 119 times. Trump and his acolytes have been casting shade on the FBI for 8 years, but the rhetoric has intensified since the arrest and conviction of those January 6 insurrectionists that Trump calls hostages and whom he promises to pardon when he gets back into office. Next slide. From the beginning of his career in politics, Trump has referred to the press as the enemy of the people. Therefore, media outlets who are mean to him will be targets of his second authoritarian reign of terror. Restructuring government communications means complete destruction of the independent press, which under our democracy has been known as the fourth estate because of its independent role in keeping government in check and working within the Constitution for the good of its citizens. Project 2025 demands a centralized media strategy. The project aims to centralize and control messaging across government agencies to ensure consistency and alignment with the administration's goals. Each department would appoint a strategic communicator to ensure adherence to this centralized media strategy, each aligned with the same conservative messaging framework. Sounds kind of like Russian state-controlled media, doesn't it? They want to use the Federal Communications Commission to enforce stricter regulations on media outlets, probably revisiting the fairness document or similar policies to ensure what they describe as balanced coverage. The project also calls for revisiting media ownership rules to potentially reduce consolidation and promote a wider diversity of voices more aligned with conservative viewpoints. Trump is threatening to pull the license of NBC network so that he can shut down MSNBC because of their criticism of him. He's already called the president of ABC network, demanding that he fire comedian Jimmy Kimmel because he makes jokes about him. Poor little deranged snowflake. Anyway, let's not forget that at the end of Trump's disastrous first term, he demanded that the head of the U.S. government agency for global media fire the head of Radio Free Europe, whose mission it is to provide accurate and reliable information to audiences in countries where media freedom is limited or restricted and has been since they've been around since World War II. This next one, combating misinformation, is almost comical, coming from a party that spews misinformation all day, every day on right-wing media channels. Despite the irony, their disinformation task force will be deployed to identify and counteract misinformation, particularly focused on narratives that seem to harmful to conservative agendas. They want to promote true, trusted news sources and emphasize supporting those that are aligned with conservative principles, potentially through government endorsements or government partnerships with private media agencies. Think Fox News or Sinclair, our local Sinclair. Under legal and legislative action, they want to change libel laws to make it easier for public figures, including politicians, to sue media outlets for defamation. And they're proposing reforming Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to hold social media platforms more accountable for content moderation practices that are perceived to be biased against conservative voices. And finally, they're considering the expansion of government-sponsored media outlets to disseminate official information directly to the public. In 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed into law a measure criminalizing reporting that contradicts the government's version of events. Can you imagine having outlets like Fox News or Breitbart as your only trusted news sources? Oof. So next slide, please. I want you to let Trump's policies sink in for a moment. 90% of the items with quotes came from Trump himself. He loves the idea of having a civil war. He wants to use his military to shoot peaceful protesters in the knees. He will abandon our NATO allies and let Putin, quote, do whatever the hell he wants with Ukraine, end quote. And when he says he will be a dictator on day one, believe him. He will go after the press and private citizens or anyone who has dared defy or criticize him. Like he did with his former fixer, Michael Cohen, these people will go to prison until Trump figures out how he wants to punish them even further. He calls immigrants vermin and says that they're poisoning the blood of our country. He promises to use the police and military to round up and put immigrants from certain countries into internment camps and ship them off to countries of his choice, whether they've ever been to that country or not. And upon taking power, authoritarians typically order the arrest and sometimes execution of political opponents and perceived threats, including military officers loyal to the former leader. Think Joseph Stalin, Saddam Hussein, Fidel Castro, and Vladimir Putin, of course, who seems to have a problem with his rivals falling out of windows. Tyrants put their potential rivals in their place, not to seize power, but to hold on to it. And I repeat, if Trump wins, he will never leave office. Next slide, please. Remember back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton labeled the people around Trump as his basket of deplorables? Well, I tried to envision the deplorables who might fill his cabinet. Poor Lee Stefan, I kind of feel sorry for her. She wanted to be VP so bad she could taste it. Instead, he chose J.D. Vance, a younger, more polished version of himself. Kash Patel has already said he wants to be FBI director. Attorney General Matt Gaetz, ooh. And in a second term, there won't be any adults in the room to stop him from exercising his worst impulses. They will all be MAGA. Every one of these folks on this slide and more will ask, how high, sir, when the authoritarian leader tells them to jump. Next slide. So the road to authoritarianism starts with the election of Donald Trump, followed by the systematic destruction of what they view as the administrative state, followed by the dismantling of more rights the Americans have always taken for granted. Birth control, gone. IVF, gone. Same-sex marriage, gone. Safe water and air, gone. Social Security and Medicare, gone. Safety from gun violence, gone. This summary I shared is 920 pages of the many ways that the Trump Project 2025 threatens our future and our freedoms. As an activist at a meeting I attended a few weeks back said something that stuck with me. Realistic fear and knowledge are important persuaders. Every American needs to adopt a hair on fire posture about the implications of a Trump victory, knowing that the Heritage Foundation will be ready to pull the trigger on all these well-defined elements of Project 2025 the very minute the race is called for Donald Trump. And for the third time, they won't wait for the inauguration. It's up to us to make sure that does not happen in November. Next slide. So these are some of the other memes in the Project 2025 social media toolkit. We have another short video to share to show you how to access the toolkit and share the social media content on a variety of platforms. And after Jeff shows you that, I would love to answer any questions that you have.
Yvonne, we're cutting short on time, so we might only be able to take 2 questions, if that.
Okay, well,
there's
I
about
can-
7 minutes left to go
Oh,
to your.
okay. Well, why don't we just
Let's go
plan to send
directly
you
to
the links.
questions then.
Go ahead and ask the questions. We'll send you links to the other content.
We were going to impress you with the fact that we have social media kits on over 65 different subjects. But we can send that in a follow-up email. I'm more concerned about participants being able to ask Yvonne questions about her presentation. And
And Jeff, there's some questions in the chat. We might want to look at those first. And everyone else, please raise your hand and let us know who you are, just your name and your question, as brief as possible, so they can get them as many answered as possible. Thank you, guys.
So the first question, Yvonne, is from Kevin Allen. Could she discuss the importance of down ballot elections, House, Senate, and how Project 2025 is already being implemented by the House, Senate if they can get it done legislatively?
I'm not sure can you repeat the question?
Can she discuss the importance of down ballot elections?
Oh, well,
I-
sure. I
House,
mean,
House, Senate, and
obviously,
how
we're,
Project 2025 is already being implemented by the House, Senate if they
It's-
can get it done legislatively.
okay, well, you can just look at states like Florida, Texas, North Carolina, not North Carolina, I'm sorry, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee. You look at those, they're implementing elements of Project 2025 now. So the importance of voting down ballot is obvious. And there are activists out there right now talking to people about making sure that they elect the House, Senate, hold the Senate, expand the Senate, and regain the House, and of course the White House. But if Donald Trump gets elected, all this goes bye-bye. They won't, I mean, we won't have the ability to vote, as I said earlier. That'll be the last vote we take.
and they're
And if-
trying to take over school boards so they can ban books and, you know, do all these other things that they want to do. Down ballot races are extremely, extremely important.
Important, yes.
Okay. The other question I see is, well, it's just a technical question. Will the slides be available? Yes, we're recording this and we'll figure out where it's posted and we'll let everybody know. Probably be on the DDI website, Facebook page, and then we'll figure out where else. But give us a couple days to figure out how to do that.
So we got a couple of hands up.
No, they have to put their questions in writing. That was one of the rules that we agreed to at the beginning of the meeting.
Oh,
So put
We're
your
fine
questions in
with
writing.
questions from people with hands up. If
No,
you,
they're gonna put their questions in writing. Thank you.
okay.
There's a question here. How do you think the Harris ticket should address Project 2025?
actually, they've been quite vocal about it. I'm really surprised. I'm one of those people I'm kind of a political junkie, so I'm watching or listening or to this stuff all the time. They are beginning to address it. The campaign is. It's coming out every day in emails from some of the activist organizations that are working with the Harris administration or a Harris campaign. Did that answer your question? Just know it's happening. It is happening. So
There's
you're on mute, Clarence.
okay, sorry. We said mute everybody, so I did. In the Medium, Seattle Black newspaper, there have been articles almost every week about Project 2025 and some ways that it's impacting Black communities,
Mhm.
communities of color. So, it's a free subscription, it's online. So, I mean, there's the Thursday printed version, but even that's free. But I would suggest that you kind of look at that and subscribe to that and kind of
Well,
check
I
that out.
actually,
There are others.
I pulled a lot of facts out of those kinds of
Oh, good.
documents because I wanted to connect it to the communities of color. So I pulled a lot of facts out of, those kinds of communiques.
Let's see, are there any new questions in the chat? Last call. As it is already.
I put on the chat, Mr. Chair.
No.
You didn't see it, I guess.
No, I don't. Please.
May I?
No. Did you put it in writing?
I did, but you must.
Then put it in writing again.
I did.
Again.
To see it.
I don't see anything from you, Verica.
And
I
there's a-
just put one in the chat.
Can you read some of them?
I'm reading them as they come in, and it says, let's see, Eric had a question. Do you know how much of Project 2025 can be done by executive order and how much will require legislation?
Say it again, please.
How much can be done by executive order and how much will require legislation?
Oh, forget really. The point is legislation will disappear. There will be no legislation. You won't have, you might have a House and a Senate, but under that regime, you have a dictator. So, that's the answer.
Okay. And then there's a question from the iPhone. I am a longtime grassroots community organizer working with Latino community, educating and registered to vote in the state of Washington. Thank you. Oh, thank you. It's not a question, sorry. Thank you for your valuable information. All right, last question. Berica, did you put your question back in writing? I do not see it.
Yes,
I've
it
scrolled
is.
up and down.
On 8/18, it has been there. I mean, I'm asking only if there is in a different language like Hispanic and others, such an important because of many of our immigrant communities, they may not understand. That could be Spanish speakers and other East African.
We
So
actually,
that's an excellent question.
Yeah.
And I think we need to look into that, right, Yvonne, about
Mhm.
Other languages, about Project 2025, is that right?
Yeah, I had not looked for other languages, but that's a good idea. And Jeff and I belong to this group of activists who meet every Monday and every Thursday with Heather Booth and Bob Kramer. And there are Voto Latina. There's a group called Voto Latina, and there's several actually Latin speaking groups. So we should take it to them and see if we can translate some of this stuff. Good idea.
So that's an excellent question, and let's take that on as a to do as a follow-on.
I will
Okay.
volunteer to translate that in Spanish.
Oh, wonderful. Thank
Oh, hey,
you.
Floria, how are you doing? Flora?
I'm blessed. I'm so
Okay.
blessed. I'm sorry I would like to take just 1 minute to thank you to Mr. Clarence Gunn for giving me the opportunity, inviting me to this meeting. What a wonderful information. The presentation that Ms. Brandon has been giving, I would love to have that in Spanish because I'm working right now with Latino Community Fund, volunteering, doing phone banking.
Oh,
And we
wonderful.
just making phone calls to Latino